we're live!
Hello and welcome to another live demonstration. Today I want to go through gouache. Now I think this is a really overlooked medium and I can understand why. For a lot of time gouache was seen as a medium that didn't have good light fast qualities, which it didn't, because it was designer gouache was used for illustrators and copy artists to do paintings that were then copied, so they didn't need to worry about the light fast properties of the paint. But today's modern techniques have allowed gouache to have artist quality, and the light fast properties have improved greatly. So initially I wanted to talk to you the difference between gouache and watercolour. But as I was using it, the more I found that actually that's quite difficult to do. Yes, it has a lot of watercolour properties, but it also has a lot of acrylic properties. And then I found myself comparing it to using a coloured pencil. So what I'm going to do is just show you gouache, and then I'll do a little study just to show you how I've been using it, but how much fun you can actually have with it. At the moment, I was really excited by this medium, which I have known about, have used, but not used it to its full potential, and I think it has a lot. So gouache, seen as an opaque watercolour. So it has pigment, binder, and it's often added a body, which is the white. It's called body, colour body, to make it opaque, which gives it the covering power, which you do get opaque watercolours, and I've just squirted out some cadmium red, which is an opaque, because I want to show you that it can work very similarly. So I'm just using a very basic set, primary colours, a brown and a black and a white, which is very important. A lot of you will have already used gouache, and it will be the white for those final details at the end of a watercolour. So that's great. So this is the red, and I'm wetting it as I would do with any watercolour. And you can see applying it very much the same way as you would a watercolour. So what I want to do is compare it to a watercolour. So this is a cadmium red, which I've chosen because it is an opaque watercolour. And you'll see I've not got the right brush for washes. I prefer a natural hair one when I'm doing a wash, because it has the ability to keep a nice clean wash, but for this it's fine, the synthetic's fine, and you'll see very similar properties. So you can make a gouache transparent and use it very similarly to a watercolour, which is absolutely fine. So that's one use for it. But why would you do that when actually it has so many other properties? What I have found is with gouache, it is very easy to create a really nice flat wash without streaks and a nice even coverage, which is why cartoonists and illustrators use it. Gouache has been around centuries. I was in the British Museum a few weekends ago, and I saw beautiful illuminations and manuscripts, and they've all used a watercolour base with a colour body, which makes an opaque watercolour, which is a gouache. And they're lovely and stunning. Even today, after all these centuries, they're still as lovely as they were when they were made. So gouache, I do find it gives a lovely smooth covering. And I don't know if you can see it here, how smooth that actually has gone on. So perfect for watercolour. What surfaces do I need? Gouache needs a surface very similarly to a watercolour. It needs to be able to be gripped and absorbed into the paper. So watercolour paper is fine. Depending again on how you're using it, if you use it very wet, you need a heavier weight paper. Or if you're, because of the opacity of it, you do tend to use it a little less wet. So again, you can use a lighter weight paper, or even a cartridge paper will work fine if you're not getting it really wet and you don't want those watercolour qualities. So watercolour paper. What's fun about gouache is it's opaque. I keep mentioning opaque, and I will show you what opaque means later. But because of its opaqueness, you can use beautiful things like coloured watercolour papers. Now these A lot of people aren't aware these are out on the market, and they work perfectly fine with watercolours, but with gouache, because of their opaque properties, they will cover and really ping out on the colour background. So use like a watercolour. Because it's opaque, it can be used on coloured backgrounds. So I'm using old mount board, which is the middle of a frame. So I don't like to waste them. And I quite like painting with these offcuts because I'm not always overly concerned with the background. For me, that's not what I'm looking for. So I'm using a nice flat brush. You can see how you can bring out, just add a bit of just texture. So put it on. And what happens with the colours with a gouache is lights tend to dry a little darker and darks tend to dry a little lighter. So I would practice and just learn how the colours dry. But you can see how I can put this on quite thickly and how it covers the colour underneath. So that's one technique. And being able to do it on coloured papers is a lot of fun. So on this one I did a squirrel. And for me, I don't know if you've seen other demos I've done, I sometimes work quite loosely and I'm quite fast. And I found with gouache, I was starting to work a lot slower and a little bit more controlled, which is great. So it was actually the medium that changed my style, not me changing my style. So try different mediums because you'll find you'll work very differently with different mediums. Watercolour can be really loose and fresh and loose, and sometimes you don't want to add the detail because it starts to move the medium on the paper. But with gouache, you can layer, you can fix, you can manipulate really easy without fear. And I had some little areas here. I was trying to do the whiskers and I thought, oops, that's a bit too blobby. It's not like simple. Just wet the brush and lift it out like you would do a watercolour. So they're very similar to watercolour properties, but you can see here, the opaqueness is very much like an acrylic. So I've been able to layer and fix things that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little demonstration of a little bunny, and it is little, it's right in the middle of this page, on this dark, again, an offcut of mount board. I love using mount board. You can use it for coloured pencil, you can use it for acrylic, you can use it for gouache. You can use it for watercolour, but you don't get quite as the strong effect because you need the opaque quality, which you get from the gouache. So, simple. This will be quick and it's quite simple. I've got the basic range, so I'm going to need to, I could just use the brown that I have, but I like to try and mix colours as much as possible, because for me, what it does is it helps me learn the properties of that colour. It helps me learn what colours I can get from very few. And I find I do tend to add white rather than add water because I want to keep it opaque. So I'm adding white to create a solid background. So gouache, like I said, it goes on quite nice, smooth and very solid. So that's what I'm just going to do. I'm just going to block out the colour on this bunny. And you can see how easy that goes on, very much like a cartoon or illustration. That nice, flat, blocked out feel. Just want to think about my ears because one's in front of the other. Again, just putting colour. I'm not overly worried where I've put the colour. I'm just putting the colour so I can see the shape of the bunny, because it's actually quite difficult to see the pencil lines against this dark background. And the light sometimes makes it a little difficult. So I don't want to lose some of my lines. I'm just blocking out. There we go, first stage. How simple is that? And gouache dries quite quickly. So you find that you're able to work on the next stage relatively quickly. Normally, I always recommend a bigger brush. Because I'm going to be working quite small, I'm actually going to now go into a smaller brush. You can use a painting knife to put gouache on. I mean, have fun that way. You know, very much like an acrylic. If you paint it very thick and you've got a flexible surface, there could be cracking. But if you've used a nice solid surface, to be honest, you can put it on quite thickly without the gouache having a problem. So that's dried now. Easy to go into the next stage, which I'm just going to do a little bit more detail on a few darker hairs on the back, and you can see how quickly I'm just bringing out some detail. And what I can do is I can layer. I can keep going over until I'm happy with the effect I've got. So darker colours dry lighter, the lighter colours dry darker. So sometimes it is a little bit more of a surprise. The darker colours you just need to go over again with, but you can go over again. The whole point is you can go over and you can build up. Go. Just building up shape of the face. What I might do is put the eye in, because I think that always helps me. I'm not doing too many hairs on the face, that's a bit further away, but I'll do the hairs on the back, bring them down, and you'll see that I'm thinking about the direction of the fur. That's really important. It's easy to put these little hairs on. You just very tip of the brush and just move your hand away, and I'm turning the brush as I'm doing it. What's important is you look at the direction that the hair goes, so it's going over the back that way. So by directing your lines that way, you're starting to mould the shape. Yeah. So you can, I don't know if you can see, but that darker is beginning to dry a little lighter, but not a problem for me. I think that works fine. I'm going to remember to put a little hint of a tail. So I'm not done grasses or anything round. I'm not worried about the background, because I know I can put those on afterwards. Okay, let's quicken this up a little bit. Not using a huge amount of water, and if I do, what I'm going to do is take some of the water out of the belly of the brush, because if I don't, what I do find is that it then works too wet. It's not quite opaque enough. So wet my brush, take some of the water out of the belly, and then just make sure my tip is loaded with colour. And then that will give me the effects I'm looking for. Okay, it's quite dark. So that has dried a lot lighter than I would like, but not a problem. I can come back in to finish off. It's going to be darker here because he's sitting or she's sitting in the grass. And I don't mind how dark I do it, doesn't matter, because I can cover with grass very easily. I can cover. The thing about gouache is it covers. I know you say opaque, but the wonderful thing is you can cover up mistakes, you can manipulate and deal with problems. But like a watercolour, you can also lift them off and go back in. And I've found that it's just as easy on the mount board to lift off as it is on the watercolour paper. As long as you don't scrub the surface, it's quite stable. It's a lovely board to work on. Gives you a nice solid board, and you're not wasting your in a bit, which you kind of think, well, what am I going to do with that of the frame? And I'm sure your framers will have offcuts that you can practice on, you can play with, or even become part of a painting. Okay, so now I'm going to look, just adding a bit of dark under here. What I'm going to do, normally I wouldn't use black, but because this is going to be quite quick, I'm just going to use the black and brown as required. So I'm putting the eye in because it just wasn't, for me, without the eye, I can't feel the characteristic of the rabbit. Now that's much better. I can see, I can feel it now, I can see. So I'm just going to add some black to that mix of brown I had, because I want it darker here, not dark enough. So I'm actually going to go quite black, bring up the darker bits, and then this ear behind is going to be darker because it's behind. So you can see here, I'm not worried about my paint drying on the palette like you would an acrylic, because I know I can re-wet it, I know I can rework it. So I'm working very much, it's difficult to describe. I love the layering, like you would do with a colour pencil. You layer each layer and you build up your texture, same as you will do with an acrylic. But I'm working with a material that I'm working familiar with a watercolour. That's why I struggled just to compare it just to watercolour, because I think it's its own unique little medium. So can you mix it with watercolour? Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, a lot of you will have used it and will have used the white as a final colour on your watercolours. So absolutely, it will mix perfectly. So that final area, you want to just add a bit more covering power, you know, to add to the foreground. You can do that with gouache. Dries very matte, like an acrylic, and it has the layering properties very much like an acrylic. Okay. So I'm just putting my dark tone, and you'll notice that also I'm putting dark tones on first. I don't have to worry about keeping the light of the paper underneath because I haven't got any white paper underneath. This is where I will use the white gouache to bring some final hairs on. Okay, so I'm going to keep fiddling with that if I don't stop now. What I'm going to do is put an almost final layer on. So if you do like fiddling and working with your work and manipulating it, this is a great medium to work in, because you can overwork, but you can fix, and you can look back, you can review and think, actually, I think that area has not worked. Let me go through it again. What I do find is the paints sometimes feel a little chalky. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm picking up contaminants. And what I do like to do, because I don't want my brush too wet, I need to mix up the nice consistency on the palette without it being too wet, just so I can load my brush and just take off some from the belly, and that will give me that lovely, nice sharp finish. Just want to add a few, don't want to overdo this. I'm going to put the tail in. You can just see it poking here beneath the photograph. This is not a good photograph. The reason being is the bunny was miles away and I was trying to zoom in. I just wanted to get a picture of a rabbit, and that was the best I could do. But that's where, as an artist, you have this chance to just be creative and think about, you know, yes, it's not a good image, but how can I make it better? How can I change and manipulate. And you can see here how this is starting to build up and how nice and flat and detailed you can bring out. I mean, if I find that's too white, I'm going to leave it and let it dry. I can go over with a more muted brown. I can go back over again, using a bit of a dry brush to quicken this up. Because go. So I want to add some more white on here. So I'm just going to take some of this brown and just mute it down because it's a bit too stark. And this is what I was doing with the image of the squirrel. I was reevaluating the colours and going back in, and maybe if it was too light I could go back in again. I can look and think about, maybe that's too white, let me go back over. The eye has dulled a little bit, so I'm just going to make sure, because I do think the eye, doesn't matter about the rest of it, but as long as the eye really pings out. Go darken here and here. Okay, I think that's fine, because what I'm going to do is now put some grasses on. Like I said before, I'm not so worried about having to leave space or mask off because it goes over. Now that colour is nice when I did it before, but I've got a darker piece of board, so I need to lighten up. I like to lighten up even more. So instead of adding water, I'm just going to add some white. My brush is a little dry, so it's making it, okay, like that blue, straight in. I want to straighten off. Now I can start to bring out some of the textures. I think I'm going to go neat him with the strong yellow. There you go, that's lovely. That suddenly just made that area pink. But this is how you work. You learn things, you try things, and because it's so easy to do, it makes you less afraid of just going, oh, let's see what happens. That's not working. What happens if I try this? And you'll find that you get a little bit more confident in other aspects of your painting as well. I want this light here because I want to just show. Okay, I've loaded my brush a little bit more.
Got a quick question, Anita.
Yes.
Ian, who's watching, wants to know if you could add some gum arabic or honey to make it less matte and chalky.
Yes, I tried that, and yes, I was going to suggest, I forgot to mention that, but yeah. Instead of adding water, what you can do is add gum arabic. And same with the watercolours, add gum arabic to your watercolours. You can also use gum arabic as a final finish and add a layer to really bring out the sheen. That's a really nice idea. It makes it even more like an oil, oil properties and that sheen. So it's a good idea to use gum arabic. So again, this medium has so many different potentials, so many applications. So you can use it like a watercolour. You can make it look like an oil, you can make it look like an acrylic, and you can make it look like its own medium. So thank you for that, Ian. But yeah, you add gum arabic to make it even more glossy and sheeny.
Is sheeny a word?
It is now. I know what I mean. There we go. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. But you can see how gouache works. I can use a thick brush, add it thickly, work like an acrylic, but I'm not worried about my paint drying. Mix very similar to a watercolour. And then just this little study, you can see, yes, I've done it in the whole area because I want to show you this beautiful colour. Then you can make a little mount that fits the bunny. Sometimes I like to mix it up and move my mount around and just see where my best composition is. Quite like that. Or, so these little mounts are great fun. It just helps you kind of finish your piece. So this was a study for me, but I could probably do it as a finished piece. One final thing I've just seen, just to finish this off, Gary, I am finishing it off.
That's all right.
Is here. I must have leaned on the paint. Yeah, I've got it on my hand. But that's really easy. I can just dab this off and I should be able to clean this area up. If not, I can solve it. That's cleaning up. And see how quickly that's drying? I can solve it by going over. This is a beautiful thing about gouache. You can go over. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and join me next week for some more live demonstrations.
Let us bring out the artist in you. If you'd like to learn how to paint or improve your painting, the SAA, Society for All Artists, is here to inform, encourage and inspire you every step of the way. When you become an SAA member, you get so many benefits, including the free bi-monthly newsletter Paint, packed with inspiring step-by-step projects, fascinating articles, and detailed information to get your creative juices flowing. Discounts on over 13,000 art products featured on the SAA website and in the Home Shop catalogue, with free order line and free delivery in the UK mainland. A devoted SAA team on hand to answer your questions and give you the confidence and motivation you need to start painting and develop at a pace that suits you. Plus, a free welcome pack filled with gifts and practical help to get you started, as well as the opportunity to make friends with like-minded people.
Best thing of being a MAP member is the inspiration for the magazines, to be able to purchase things at a very reasonable price.
Yeah, you get the reduction on all the materials, the advice you get.
I could shop from home.
It's a community.
It seemed like a very friendly sort of organisation.
If somebody's thinking of joining, don't spend too long thinking. Just join. They'll love it.